God has answered all of Habakkuk's questions, and yet he still doesn't feel settled. And so he's going to sing about it. And his song, man, it feels like it could have been taken right out of the book of Psalms. I mean, literally, take a look at this. So here we are cruising along in chapter 2, and we get to chapter 3, and there's this like strange interruption, a prayer of Habakkuk the prophet, according to the Shigionoth. And then we have all these little like liturgical interruptions. You recognize this from the book of Psalms, don't you? Selah, Selah. And then look how it ends. The last little line here, to the choir master with stringed instruments. You've seen this before in the book of Psalms. It's all over. Look how all these little liturgical elements are right from the book of Psalms. So several of the Psalms, especially of David, are labeled prayers. This is in kind of the superscription of these Psalms, 17, 86, 90, 102, a prayer of David, a prayer of Moses, a maskil of David when he was in a cave, a prayer. And then the only other time where this description of a shigionoth or a shigion is described is Habakkuk 3 and Psalm 7. And then this phrase, to the choir master, is all over the book of Psalms, 55 times. And then another 7 times, these psalms are described as with the stringed instruments. Make sure you sing Psalm 4 with the stringed instruments. Is that how you play the violin? I don't know. However, despite Habakkuk chapter 3 feeling like it was pulled out of the book of Psalms, it fits perfectly here in the book of Habakkuk. You see, God's solution, we've learned up to this point that God's solution for the wickedness in Judah is to raise up the nation of Babylon as his rod of discipline against that nation, but then to punish Babylon for its own wickedness. And yet, Habakkuk, he still has doubts. He's not sure that he has the faith to wait for this promised word of God to take place. And so he begins his prayer song with this tension. Let's go to that prayer again and see how Habakkuk starts it. Back to the beginning of chapter 3, a prayer of Habakkuk. Oh Lord, oh Yahweh, I heard the report of you and your work which you did in the past, your mighty saving acts of old, the Exodus and other moments like that. I know I've listened to these witnesses of your power in the past, but I mean, let's be honest, that was a long time ago. And so he prays, in the midst of years, right now, today, do it again. Revive your work. Here we are, your work. Revive your work. Do it again, O Lord. And because the written vision wasn't good enough for Habakkuk, God will mercifully give Habakkuk a visual vision, not a written one, but a visual vision. And here in the middle of chapter 3, verses 3 to 15, we have a narration of this vision which Habakkuk witnessed and then wrote a song about. It's interesting. It's because Yahweh recognizes that Habakkuk is struggling to have faith in the future based on a report of God's saving acts in the past. Look what God's going to do. He's going to he's going to pick Habakkuk up and transport him back in time to like the moment of the Exodus. And he's going to allow Habakkuk to witness the saving acts of God in the Exodus with his own eyes. I mean, this is like Adventures in Odyssey, the imagination station. Come and take a look at this. It's amazing. Oh, I've heard the report of you, what you did way back then. And God's like, well, let me show you what I did way back then. God came, he arrived, he was on the march from Teman and from Mount Paran and the tents of Cushan. They witnessed his coming. So did the land of Midian. Now, these geographical references are telling us the route that God is marching through. This is him going from Mount Sinai through the wilderness towards the promised land. He's leading his people to the promised land in fulfillment of the vision for that day, the word of God that they were promised. the land. And as he's marching through the wilderness, his splendor, his brightness, his glory covered the heavens. The earth was filled with his praise. His brightness was like light. I mean, think about the pillar of fire which went up from the tabernacle as they went through the wilderness. And then it's not just that, but there's lightning. You see rays flashed from his hand. This is like lightning that he's throwing down on the earth. And when he does so, he's going to shake the nations, and the eternal mountains are shattered. The everlasting hills, they sank low. It is as if Habakkuk is being given like a glimpse into the spiritual realm of what was happening as God was leading his people through Sinai. And then as the poem progresses, there's kind of a transition between verse 7 and verse 8, where in the initial section, it's all third person pronouns, his, he, him, he. But then in verse 8, it changes to second person, your, you. And here in the second person, or in this second person section, Habakkuk is taken to Yahweh's victory over Pharaoh at the Red Sea, where God battled the waters themselves. Was your wrath against the rivers, O Lord? Your anger against the rivers, your indignation against the sea, when you rode on your chariot of salvation, and you split the earth with rivers? Down to verse 15, you trampled the sea with your horses, that chariot of salvation, the surging of the mighty waters. God's victory, you could say at the Red Sea or at the Jordan River or at creation, when God battled the waters, the chaos waters. Now, are you ready? You got your seatbelt on? Are you sitting down? You ready to have your mind blown? You see, our God battled the sea monster. He battled a dragon of the sea, and he won. Take a look at this. This is amazing. Now, there's no sea monster here in the book of Habakkuk, but there is in several other places. So here we have God's wrath against the rivers, the sea, the raging waters. Well, in Job 26, it says that by his power, he stilled the sea, and this kind of sounds like Habakkuk, but then by his understanding, he shattered Rahab. And who is Rahab? Rahab is the fleeing serpent, which God pierced. And then if we go to Psalm 74, an amazing psalm, you divided the sea and you split open the brooks and the streams. But how does he describe this conquest over the sea? By breaking the heads, plural, of the sea monsters, crushing the heads of the Leviathan. You rule over the sea. You crushed Rahab like a carcass. When you founded the heavens and the earth. And Isaiah 27 looks into the future, and he says that in that day, Yahweh will punish Leviathan, the fleeing serpent. Now, we've heard that before, the fleeing serpent. Leviathan, he's the twisting serpent in the sea. God will slay the dragon. And this is kind of what happened in the Exodus when God made a way. Look at this. He made a way through the sea for his redeemed people to pass through the middle of the Red Sea. And in so doing, it says that he cut Rahab in pieces. He pierced the dragon. Isn't this amazing? This is pretty crazy. So where's this idea coming from? Well, in Canaanite mythology, Baal, he defeated the god Yam, the chaos god of the sea. Baal killed him. And then in Babylonian mythology, Marduk, their god Marduk, conquered Tiamat in order to bring the creation into order. Now, none of that happened. It's all garbage. There's no such thing as Baal and Tiamat, Marduk. However, God also didn't literally fight a dragon. However, the biblical authors are going to borrow that imagery as an imaginative retelling of God's victory over the forces of chaos and of darkness. And they're going to use this to describe God's victory over the sea. And we see this in a couple of important moments. Let's return to that chart. When did this happen? It happened at the creation of the heavens and the earth. Back in Genesis 1, in the beginning, when the earth, it was chaotic and it was dark. It was without form. It was void and it was dark. But God, he defeated that darkness and that chaos, and he brought order and he brought light. And he's going to do it again in Revelation 21. God's going to make a new heaven and a new earth. And in this space, all the forces of chaos and darkness, the very sea itself, will be no more. And Habakkuk tells us, returning to the book of Habakkuk, that God engaged in this epic cosmic battle for the sake of his people, for the salvation of his people and his anointed. A reference, no doubt, to the coming king from the line of David. Now, can you imagine being Habakkuk, or even being Job at the end of the book of Job, after having witnessed this vision of God coming in light and in cloud and throwing his lightning bolts on the nations and the mountains shattering? Can you imagine being Habakkuk, having seen this? Do you think that you would be able to keep your feet beneath you? Well, Habakkuk did after he heard this vision, but only just barely. It says in verse 16 that I hear and my body trembles. My lips, they quiver. My feet tremble beneath me. You see, he was told in the very important verse, chapter 2, verse 4, that the righteous will live by faith, and they will wait for the coming fulfillment of the word of God. Well, it was only after witnessing the unrivaled power of God here in chapter 3 that he exerts for the salvation of his people that Habakkuk's faith was restored. And so he can say, let's look at this, chapter 2, verse 16. After his faith is restored, he can say, I will wait. Now he's going to wait. He can wait now for the day of the Lord to come upon those who invade us. I can wait by faith. You see, the book of Habakkuk is all about faith. And the prophet Habakkuk, he's a little bit like the disciple Thomas, isn't he? Remember what Thomas said in John, I think it's 20, where he says, man, unless I see the holes in his hands, I will never believe. And what did Jesus do? Mercifully, he gave Thomas that vision. But then he said, now, you believe, Thomas, because you have seen. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet believe. That's you and me, isn't it? It's the majority of people in Israel who never experienced a vision like this, and yet in faith they waited for their coming anointed one, and they did so for centuries. And we now today, we join them, those faithful Israelites, and we wait for the return of that anointed one to come and to establish his kingdom, which will be characterized by a knowledge of the glory of the Lord covering the earth like the waters cover the sea. In dialoguing with his creator, Habakkuk learned how to wait for the dawn, for the brightness of Yahweh to come, even in the midst of darkness. And though he had a little bit of help, he teaches us to do the same. Look at the closing lines of the book of Habakkuk, the transformation of the prophet, and his belief now in the word of Yahweh. He says that I will wait for that day to come, even though the fig tree should not blossom. There be no fruit on the vines. The produce of the olives, it fails. The fields yield no food. The flocks are cut off. There's no herds in the stalls. Even though all is darkness around me, yet I will rejoice in Yahweh. I will take joy in the God of my salvation.